The next laptop you buy is already more expensive. You just don't know it yet. Intel has quietly confirmed a 10% price increase on its CPUs, and by the time you finish this video, you'll know exactly how much that adds to your next device purchase, which products get hit hardest, and the one narrow window where you can still beat it. Most of the coverage on this story stops at the headline. Intel raises prices, tech companies grumble, end of story. But that framing completely misses the point. A CPU price hike doesn't stay inside the tech industry. It travels. It moves through manufacturers, through retailers, and it lands directly on the sticker price of the device you're planning to buy. We're going to trace that entire path today, step by step, so you understand not just what happened, but what it's going to cost you personally and when. To understand why this matters, you need to know what a CPU actually is, and why Intel's position is so consequential. A CPU, Central Processing Unit, is the core brain of virtually every laptop, desktop, and server on the market. Intel has held a dominant share of that market for decades. We're talking about processors found inside machines made by Dell, HP, Lenovo, Apple's competitors, and virtually every enterprise server rack in existence. When Intel moves its price, it doesn't just affect one product. It shifts the cost floor for an enormous slice of the entire consumer electronics market. The reported 10% increase applies to Intel's OEM pricing. That's the price charged to the manufacturers who build your devices. And that cost, reliably and historically, does not get absorbed. It gets passed on. Here's how a 10% chip price increase becomes a noticeably larger number on the device you're actually buying. When Intel raises its OEM processor price by 10%, that's the starting point, not the ending point. The manufacturer who buys that chip, say Lenovo or Dell, has to rebuild their bill of materials around the new cost. They don't just pass on exactly 10%, they apply their own margin calculation on top of the new cost baseline. Typically, by the time a cost increase moves from component supplier to finished product, it gets multiplied. Industry analysts tracking previous Intel pricing cycles have noted that a 10% component increase can translate to anywhere from a $15 to $25 increase on a mid-range consumer laptop, and significantly more on premium or business-grade machines. On a high-performance workstation or enterprise server, where you might have multiple high-end Intel chips, that multiplier effect compounds. Then add retail margin on top. The retailer, whether that's Best Buy, Amazon, or a corporate procurement portal, layers their markup over whatever the manufacturer charges. So by the time that 10% chip increase reaches you, it is passed through at least 2 or 3 margin layers. The concrete implication, if you're planning to buy a mid-range laptop in the next 12 to 18 months, budget for it costing $20 to $50 more than the equivalent model costs today. For a business buying 100 laptops, that's potentially thousands of dollars in unplanned spend. This is not speculation. It's the documented pattern of every previous CPU pricing cycle. And here's what makes this worse. The 10% Intel announced is the floor, not the ceiling. Manufacturers are already factoring in additional cost pressures on top of it. Not every device gets hit equally, and understanding the distribution matters if you're planning any kind of tech purchase in the next 2 years. The devices most exposed to this price increase fall into 3 categories. First, mid-range to premium consumer laptops. These are the $700 to $1,500 machines that make up the bulk of consumer purchases and almost all corporate laptop fleets. These devices use Intel's mainstream and performance tier processors. Exactly the SKUs where the 10% increase bites hardest in absolute dollar terms. Second, desktop workstations and small business PCs. These machines often use Intel's higher margin, higher cost processors. A 10% increase on a chip that already costs several $100s in component pricing means a significantly larger dollar impact on the final device. Third, and this is the one most people aren't thinking about, servers. Every company running Intel-based server infrastructure, and that is the majority of corporate data centers globally, faces higher refresh costs. That cost will eventually reach you indirectly through cloud service pricing, SaaS subscription increases, or simply slower enterprise IT investment. Consumer laptops and desktops are the visible, direct impact. The server ripple is the slower, less visible one, but it's real and it's larger in aggregate. Budget laptops and Chromebooks, which often use lower-tier Intel chips or alternative processors, will see smaller absolute increases but are not immune. The devices you need to watch most closely are the ones in that $800 to $1,400 range, the mainstream productivity machines. Those are the ones absorbing the full force of this pricing shift. So at this point, you might be thinking, fine, I'll just switch to AMD. And that instinct is worth examining, because the answer is more complicated than most people assume. AMD is Intel's primary competitor in the CPU space, and on paper, a 10% Intel price hike sounds like a gift to AMD. More expensive Intel chips should drive more buyers toward AMD-powered devices, forcing AMD to stay competitive on price. And to some extent, that's true. But there are real limits to how much relief this provides for consumers. First, market structure. Many device lines, particularly in the business and enterprise laptop segment, are designed around Intel platforms. Switching chip suppliers isn't as simple as swapping a component. It requires manufacturers to redesign motherboards, optimize software, and often recertify devices for enterprise deployment. That takes time and money, which means even companies that want to shift toward AMD can't do so overnight. Second, AMD knows it has pricing leverage right now. When Intel raises prices, AMD doesn't necessarily hold the line out of charity. It has historically moved its own pricing to just below Intel's new floor, capturing market share while also improving its own margins. So the AMD alternative may be cheaper than Intel post-hike, but not as much cheaper as you might hope. Third, and this is genuinely underreported, AMD's own supply constraints and manufacturing partnerships with TSMC create their own pricing pressures. The entire semiconductor manufacturing ecosystem is under cost pressure right now, not just Intel. The practical takeaway: AMD-powered devices will likely remain meaningfully cheaper than Intel equivalents in the same performance tier. And for a consumer buying a personal laptop, choosing an AMD-based machine is a real way to partially sidestep this increase. But AMD is not a free escape hatch. Expect AMD pricing to drift upward too, just more slowly and from a lower starting point. Here's the number that should actually drive your decision. Price increases from supplier to shelf typically take 6 to 9 months to fully materialize. That window is open right now. This is where we close the loop from the opening, because knowing the price is going up is only useful if you know what to actually do with that information. Here's the actionable breakdown. The 6 to 9 month lag between a supplier price increase and a retail price increase is your window. Manufacturers have existing inventory purchased at old prices. Retailers have stock on shelves priced at old margins. That means for roughly the next 2 to 3 quarters, you can still buy current generation Intel-based devices at pre-hike pricing, at least for the most part. After that, new inventory priced at the higher OEM cost starts flowing through, and sticker prices adjust. So if you have a planned device purchase, a laptop refresh, a desktop upgrade, a home office setup, pulling that purchase forward by even 1 quarter could save you a meaningful amount, not just the Intel chip premium, but the compounded retail margin on top of it. Second action: seriously evaluate AMD-based alternatives for your use case. For most productivity tasks, office work, web browsing, light creative work, AMD's Ryzen processors in the same price tier are genuinely competitive with Intel equivalents. If you're not doing specialized workloads that specifically benefit from Intel architecture, an AMD laptop bought today gives you 2 advantages. You're paying current pricing, and you're buying a platform that won't absorb the full Intel price hike going forward. Third, for anyone managing a business or IT budget, flag this now for your next procurement cycle. The enterprise impact of this pricing shift is significant, and finance teams that haven't modeled for it will be caught short when refresh quotes come back higher than expected. The final piece, and this is the one most people miss, this is not a one-time event. Intel has a pattern of incremental pricing adjustments. The 10% announced now is likely the beginning of a multi-year repricing trend driven by rising fabrication costs, energy prices at chip fabs, and ongoing investment in next-generation manufacturing. The devices you buy in 2026 may be the last ones at anything close to 2024 pricing levels. Plan accordingly. Here's what we want to know from you. Do you have a device purchase coming up in the next year? And does this change your timeline or your platform choice? Drop it in the comments. Intel or AMD? Buying now or waiting? And why? The discussion in the comments on stories like this is genuinely useful for other people making the same decision, so don't skip it. If this breakdown was useful, subscribe to Trends Daily, and here's exactly what that gets you. Next week, we're covering the broader semiconductor pricing story. Why chip costs are rising across the board, what TSMC's own pricing moves mean for every device category, and whether the era of steadily falling electronics prices is actually over for good. That's the bigger picture behind today's Intel story, and it affects every tech purchase you make for the rest of this decade. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it, and if you want to go deeper on today's story right now, the next video is queued up.